Well, welcome to a new Harry's Garage, and today's car is the DB11, Aston's new car. What I love about this car, it's all new. It's new engine, so V12 twin turbo this time, capacity gone from 6 litre down to 5.2, but those twin turbos boost power to just on 600 horsepower, 608 PS in exact figures, 700 newton meters of torque. 200 mile an hour Aston, for goodness sake. Quite dramatic upstep. This is the car that replaces the DB9. Funny enough, there's a DB9 behind me. A friend dropped one off just so I could try that while I had this car in. And what a move. The DB9 launched in 2003, 450 horsepower, very beautiful Aston. But I can remember at Evo, early days of Evo, we gave it a test, and God, we got in trouble with Aston Martin because it just felt unfinished to us. We were hauled up in front of the headmaster at Aston for how we could put on the cover that why it fails its greatest test. Not so with this one. This is the dramatically new modern Aston, and I've only used it for a few days now, but what a change, what a sea change. I'll get into the drive-in when we go off. I'm going to head into London via a fairly scenic route on the way out, and I'll go into the mall driving out. Let's concentrate on the details. Let's have a look at some of the things that make this car a very special car. Now, first thing I want to say is you can't help mistake this but for an Aston Martin, and what a handsome Aston it is too. I'm very surprised that a large number of people have said to me, oh, it's not a very good looking Aston, this one, it's not distinctive enough. I say rubbish. This is one of the most beautiful cars I think on the road. Where it's really changed over previous generations of Aston, it has a one-piece bonnet. So if I look here, this is a one-piece aluminium bonnet, no wings, the whole lot hinges up, as we'll have a look at in a moment, and it sort of gives the car a stance, a wide stance. Those mirrors stepped up, the waist on this car with the dramatic rear wings, it reminds me of Aston 177, and if you're going to look like some Aston, that's not a bad one to look like. They have these new vents, curlicue vents, they just call them, on the front wheel arch, that vent out of the front wheel arch. I think there's a dramatic problem with those, as again we'll get to in a moment, but they do look ace. And then you can see some aero coming along the sill, coming out of that front wing, and then when you get to the rear of the car, the aero at the rear I think is really clever. You'll see on the boot there's this slot here, and it's actually venting air out. It hardly looks as though it has a huge volume of air to deal with, but basically at the rear screen here you have air shooting around the body and charges down that slot there, a bit like a Ferrari 599. And then if I lift the boot lid, you can see where that air then exits through this hole here, and it comes into the boot lid and then pops out of here, and that gets rid of the turbulence behind. So having a sort of ducktail kick up like you'll see on the current Aston Martin Vantage, this is a much better solution, and it also has a little wing that when the brain inside decides it needs a bit more downforce, you can pop that up as well as like a added spoiler. Just while we're in the boot, I ought to mention it's a fair bit bigger than a DB9, which is pretty cool. These have little hatches in here. They hide the sort of your can of foam and things like that. And that one actually is a sort of secret place you can hide things in. But yeah, decent sized boot. I noticed a little camera. This car comes all sorts of extras on it, and it even has park assist. I haven't actually worked out how to work it yet. One thing I ought to mention on the spec of this car, some wise spark decided to put a cream parcel shelf in it, and all you see is reflections constantly as you drive along. Dark parcel shelves is the way to go, not a bright one like that. And I love those LED lights, those wrap round, they're sort of so elegant. Twin pipes, a slight venturi happening at the rear, really elegant car. Okay, now let's look under the bonnet and have a look at that slight issue I have with those vents. There we go. Beautifully front hinged bonnet, one piece. You can see how far back they've managed to place the engine. This car is about, I think it's 65mm longer wheelbase than the DB9. That's just to allow the engine to move slightly back and give a bit of interior space. Now, the problem I have with those curly vents is, yes, they're venting from the front bonnet. I had this car washed, and I think all DB11 owners will be constantly washing their cars. You can see the amount of grime, winter grime, that comes into this wheel arch, and it is then forced back through these vents and right down the side of your car. That, if you live where I live, a bit in the country, is going to be a complete pain over the winter. I don't know, you can see the sort of mud all over the bonnet in there as well. I love the look of it. I really think it must work really well, but I think to live with during the winter, it's going to drive me nuts. Also, while we're here, I ought to mention this DB9 comes with steel brakes as standard, 6-pot calipers. They haven't gone for carbon, but I think that's quite sensible, because I think it's aggressively priced at 154,000 list, and that does include a 5-year service plan now, a bit like Ferrari offer on all their cars. I think that's a great move by Aston to introduce that, so it's free servicing for the first 5 years and 50,000 miles. But I do love the look of it. Oh, something on the bonnet hole to show you as well. When you close it, it's the first bonnet I know with, there you go, soft close. No more slamming bonnets trying to get them forced down. This one has soft close. Terrific. We have a look inside. The doors come up in typical Aston fashion to give a very easy access. The sills dropped as well. Lovely nameplate on as you enter the cabin. Completely different cabin to anything we've seen from Aston before. I'm going to show you that actually when we go outside. When we're doing the drive down, I'll go through the details of the cabin. One thing I ought to mention, they tell me there's more space in the rear, but it's still as tight as ever. I mean, it's hardly compromised in the back. There's that thing, motors back. I don't know how you're going to use those seats. I rather wish they'd offer a sort of shelf, a fold-down seat, so you could have a rear parcel shelf there. I think it'd be more useful than fairly useless rear seats. Okay, that's a quick tour around the DB11. Now let's get it on the road and see what it's like there. Okay, the first thing that strikes you about DB11 when you get into it, new dash, completely new architecture in front of me, more space than DB9. This particular one is quite a bright interior, so it just feels more airy, instantly more airy than DB9. And then you're met with this slightly square wheel, which again, 177 had it, and it seems to work much better than you expect, because it was a no-no, a square wheel, but it's very rounded at the edges. It's not distinctly square. The other thing about it is it has this soft start. It starts off as GT mode, and you only have to travel a few hundred meters and you realise that this has been damped for comfort. It's a very nice way, it just wafts away. Doesn't feel harsh. A really nice setting. Gearbox 8-speed ZF does this all day long. It really makes me wonder how long we'll have dual clutch transmissions. They sort of sound sexy on the spec sheet, but when you've got a ZF normal torque auto as good as this, it just makes me wonder if the dual clutch transmission will fade away. I don't know. What else is there? The architecture I'm faced with, I sort of recognise. A whole lot has been lifted from Mercedes. So you have this screen up here, always on show, and then all the down here, the finger controls, as you recognise from Mercedes. On the plus side, it's one of the best systems going. On the minus side, I think it doesn't help the interior at all. I really wish that screen wasn't on permanent display. Aston interiors used to be a thing of wonder. I can remember again, DB9 when that arrived and it had that swept up finish, the screen folded away, and the car I had actually had bamboo finish, the first car I drove, and it looked terrific. So yeah, I sort of wish that wasn't there, and you know, if anything the screen would fold away, but no, it doesn't. I've also got a highly intelligent touchpad, so this being the launch edition, you get all the extras with this car, and it's a very advanced system, but you have to know your way around it. What else have I got? I've got a centre console that completely fooled me to begin with. I was trying to lift it up like this, Turns out it's electric, little rocker button, it motors backwards and forwards. Slightly unnecessary, but quite cool. Memory seats. Seats feel good. They grip me. They're comfortable. You sit quite low in it. I've actually put it a little bit up because even I'm 6'2", 6'3", and felt that I was almost in a race car mode. I was sort of peering over the dash, so I've put it up in the air. My wife, 5'6", 5'7", said, "Well, I can't drive that. That's way too low, even the seat right up." So yeah, it's you're very much down. It's a lot of adjustment on the seats, but you sit very low in this car. Right, let's see if I can get past. No, there's a car still there. You've got modes on the exhaust, so I love when you start up, there's two modes. You just stab the starter, it erupts V12 noise as you'd expect, or you can just continue to hold the starter as it's starting, and then it starts in a softer mode, quieter mode. Great thinking that. Again, I had that Maserati Gran Turismo, and I had a lot of people, you just only started in full raucous rah! And sometimes when you're tiptoeing away at 1 o'clock in the morning or 5 o'clock in the morning, that's a bit of a pain. Not on this Aston, you can control it. And this lorry is going the same way as I am. Right, there's a little overtake down here, so I will go past it as soon as we're down here. Now I'm on winter tyres on this car, and yeah. Now we're on one of my favourite bits of road here. I'm still in GT mode. I'm going to put it into sport. Just on the wheel, really nice control. Again, it's a usable sport. It makes it a bit more reactive. The gearbox, slightly different suspension, slightly more damper control. I can touch a paddle, full-size paddle on the column, which I really like, rather than having them on the wheel. And then I'm in manual mode on the gearbox. And it's like the suspension. It breathes. DB9 when it first came out was a nightmare suspension. It was choppy. It sort of ran out of travel. Utterly different, this car. Feels very, very composed through here. It's that Matt Becker influence, I suspect. Matt Becker is the engineer this is his first Aston he engineered. He came from Lotus, and there's a Lotus feel about this Aston, and it doesn't come higher praise for a B road blast like this than that. Very good control. As I say, I've had this a few days. I've driven it pretty hard. I've never felt it completely bottom out or anything on some of the roughest roads, and it always seems to be able to deal whatever I throw at it. Very nice feel to it, and it's a sport setting that you can use. There is the Sport Plus above it, that makes it a bit more aggressive. I like to have the throttle control as it is. I've got a separate damper control if I want to slip enough the dampers 1 stage, 2 stage beyond what it does in race. Just a nice setup. It also opens those exhaust valves as well. Funny enough, with 600 horsepower, you'd think it's a monster, the engine, but it doesn't have that F12 craziness about it. It feels as though you can deploy the horsepower quite happily, and then you notice, oh, it's spinning up. It's just at the edges of adhesion as it comes onto boost. So it's one of those great turbo engines that it's actually worth revving out. God, it's greasy today. Deploy those 600 horsepower today, but I love being able to sort of play with it. I'm not intimidated at all, even that headline figure. And now I've called some cars up. So yeah, little taste for you there. I've got to get a move on. I've got to get on that motorway and get down to London. What time is it? God, I'm meant to be there in about an hour and 10 minutes. So next time you join me, we'll be on the motorway and we'll just see what it behaves like there. Okay, we're just coming out of Oxford, just about to get onto the M40. It's remarkable how usable these sort of cars have got over the last few years. You know, Ferrari 488, F12, and now this DB11 can do the day-to-day role. There isn't that awkwardness that there used to be only a few years ago. That it was a bit of a fish out of water. Now, yeah, regular traffic isn't a problem. What I notice on this DB11 though is it's got an aluminium structure, which is good. That makes it lighter. So yeah, 1900 kilos all up as I'm running down the road now. I think its closest rival is probably the Bentley Continental GT or something like that, and that's it's the same price point, about 150,000 for the Bentley now, and that car is about 300 kilos heavier. But the downside of aluminium is you get a little bit of noise transmission. It's quite hard to isolate noise. It transmits noise better. And like the current 911, there is a sort of hum of big tyres coming through the cabin. I would actually expect the winter tyres to make it better, but it's certainly there. This particular car's got a 1,000-watt B&O sound system, so it's quite easily to drown out. But if you're just making phone calls and things like that, you sort of notice this background hum. Having said that, they've really worked on the hands-free. I've got it all hooked up, speaker up there, works a treat. Again, it comes back to that Mercedes. They've integrated all their electronics, which is just ace on a car like this. But anyway, I've still got to go move on. I've caught up a little bit of time somehow. If anybody knows Oxford, that's unheard of. But I'm motoring down. I've got a cruise control as well, so I'm going to set cruise. And at that point, this single dial in the dash then turns into a speedo around the outside, so it's a bit odd. It's not an intelligent cruise, so it's not picking up radar. I don't think it is. There's a car here. No, it's not picking up radar, which is a surprise. So it's a regular cruise control, stops me speeding because it is ridiculously easy to speed in these sort of cars. And we'll go down just over the national speed limit, a little bit of, I'm sure it's not accurate, this speed, I'm sure it's telling porkies, but about 1800 revs. I should add something else I saw in the press kit. Very clever, this engine. So V12, you'd expect it to be green. It shuts down cylinders, but it doesn't do individual pots. It shuts down a bank of cylinders. So I'm probably just cruising along with a 6-cylinder Aston at the moment. The other 6 are just resting. And then it detects if the catalyst on the side that's been shut down starts to cool down below optimum temperature, it switches. So it shuts down the 6 it's been using and pops the other 6 in. I have no idea any of that's going on, but that's the sort of technology that's on this car. I mean, right at the cutting edge of fuel economy, etc. I never expect to say that about Aston and be at the cutting edge, but I sense they are with this car, which is great to see. Right, we're getting closer to London. We're just coming up to the Westway now, and I've made up some time. Don't know how that must have happened. And now I'm really in the thick of it. It's all very strange when you have stop-start on a car like this, because there's this ever-present V12 and suddenly you get to a traffic light, so I'm sitting at traffic lights at the moment, and there's suddenly silence. Notice it more on a car like this because it's the sound. Here we go, the start up. The only thing I'd say, it does take a little bit of start in the V12. It doesn't spin into life like that. There is just a little bit too much starter motor for me. Don't know why. It must be, you'd think there was something on setup. I don't know how it all works. And the other thing, I'm slightly clumsy on the brakes in traffic, and I've been driving this car for a good few days. It's very sensitive. It's just hard to modulate just to a stop. They're great on the open road. There's no problem with having steel discs rather than carbon for me. This isn't a track car. You only really get the benefit of carbon discs if you're going on track. But for feel, steel is good. But I just sense I'm just not as easy to modulate as I'd like at really low speeds, just when we're like here, like that. I want to come to a gradual stop and I just can't quite do it. Stop slightly too suddenly, over servoed or something. Ever-present sirens of a police car seems to be the soundtrack of London these days. Right, we're getting into proper DB11 or Aston territory, right inside the London congestion charge. I have to say it's handled it pretty well. I'm still comfy. Great sound, etc. Yeah, quite sensitive parking sensors. Just the cars going past me seem to trigger it as well. And the stop-start seems to work okay. I'm getting 14.8 litres per 100 kilometre consumption-wise. I don't know why. I've tried every way of trying to change that to miles per gallon. Can't do it. But I think that translates to about 19 to the gallon. It does make you wonder what MPG it'd be doing without all the cylinder deactivation and all the rest of it, because it's been a pretty easy journey in. Yeah, so yeah, and I'm on time, which I can't quite believe, because I never am. I'd like to tell you all about the sat-nav as well, but I can't because I didn't use it. I'm a bit addicted to Waze, this sort of app you have on your phone, because I just find it works way better. London is just a construction site these days as well. Portland Place, that seems to suit Aston quite well. Can't imagine ever doing this, say, with a manual, all that. Oh, the dreadful single plate clutch Aston used to use. This at ZF 8-speed is transformed no end of cars. It is of a standard I never thought we'd get to with an automatic gearbox. I just wish they did brakes, because these are hard to modulate, it has to be said. Right, very nearly there. Ooh, a few more pedestrians to run over. It gives me the thumbs up. This is an old Evo car park as well, so you used to see some crazy stuff in here. And it just looks in the middle of London, you think, what's that Ferrari doing? It was all shared with Auto Express as well, and it was quite fun, some of the stuff we used to see in this car park. They've moved on now, I'm afraid, so they're not parking there anymore, but it had a real tricky approach. So that was always the test, whether you could, get over this giant hump. I couldn't bring the Zonda and things like that down here, but anything with front lift you could just about get in. I think this will just cope just fine. Let's see. Does it scrape its nose? No. Good. Ooh. Sat-nav gets a bit upset. I don't want to curb. I do like the mirrors on this car. They're nice and wide. They're out on stalks. Yeah, the killer curbs here, but we're all right. Right. Ah. It's a good idea to take your camera off before you do that. Oh, be quiet. If I could find it, this would be a good test for it. It can do parallel parking, it can do bay parking like this. But I do get a bird's eye view of the car. You can't park there. You might as well give up parking. So I'll go right up close. Yeah, really good cameras, I have to say. And a bird's eye view. Right, we're here. Lunchtime. So that's lunch done. It's always good in London, especially just before Christmas. And that was a good trip in this, a good test really for this DB11. It sort of feels like what this car is made for really. Everybody sort of thinks, oh, you go drive down to South France, etc. People don't do that really. They wander down to London, they go back to their homes, and they want to enjoy the comfort and the design of Aston, and that's what this car does really. Having lived with it, the things that I find a bit disappointing are, well, firstly, the interior. The interior doesn't quite feel special enough. I don't know if you can hear that. That isn't a sound I want to hear from Aston. It doesn't feel like real wood. It just doesn't have a quality feel about it. I expect a sort of B&O coolness to the interior of a Aston Martin, and it's a bit lacking here. Remember when DB9 came out, it did look very different, had tiny little buttons that were a bit annoying, but there was a coolness to it that isn't here in this car. I don't think it's helped by the Mercedes add-ons and the screen, even though they offered this real, genuine usability. What else? Full of reflections, this car, but that's a particular spec of this car. There's never a good idea to spec light coloured levers if they can reflect in windscreen, front or rear screens. It's full of them, this car, but that's easily get around that. Interior space. I thought if it's actually going to compete with Bentley Conti GT, Maserati Gran Turismo, and whatever comes next, I expect a bit more usability in the rear. They're really token rear seats, whatever they say. Yes, you can get ISOFIX rear seats in them. If anybody's tried to haul babies and kids in and out of baby seats in a two-door car, you only do it once or twice, complete pain. I'm just surprised they haven't actually just lengthened or taken this opportunity to separate this car from Vantage and whatever comes next from a proper 2+2. And then those vents on the outside, it might be just where I live and there's always a bit of mud around, and but other people do live outside of London, and I think those vents are going to drive you crazy as they just squirt mud down the side of your cars, even though you thought your car was clean. But then we get on to the positives, and hats off for sticking with V12, adding 2 turbos. That feels, it's still 5.2 litres, so this isn't a baby V12. It's a great engine. It has character. It gets better the more you rev out. Yeah, only 7,000 RPM, but it offers huge potential for the future. And they've kept that V12 growl, that famous Aston growl. There's no muffling of the turbos, and it's real sound. There's nothing piped into the interior. So I'm really impressed of how they've managed to do that. The design, I will hit someone if someone says, oh, well, that DB11 doesn't look any good. Have a look at this car, have a look at the reaction of this car on the street. This looks fantastic. I think they must have made a mistake with some of the press cars with the black roof and the side screens and things, because everybody reacts to this car in silver. It looks delightful. It's what I want an Aston to do. I think it's actually value as well. I think 154,000 with that service pack, etc. That's £80,000 cheaper than a Ferrari F12, for example. Yes, it price matches the Conti GT, but I think there's more glamour to an Aston Martin than there is to a Bentley GT. Then the chassis. This has a suspension setup that breathes, that works on UK roads, and I've got 3 variables from GT to Sport to Sports Plus, all of them usable, and damper settings. The setup on this car is fantastic. I can use that power, locking slip, differential at the back, the electric power steering, very pointed 2.5 turns lock to lock, feels dynamic. It doesn't feel like a sledgehammer to crack a nut as the Conti GT can sometimes. This feels agile. It's sort of on its own, 2-wheel drive. That's what it shares with Ferrari and F12 and things. I really like the setup. And finally, what I most love about this is a new Aston that feels modern. They're always slightly flaky. Up to now, they were always, yeah, but it's an Aston. No excuse to this car. This feels bang up to date, a great car right from the outset, and to compete on a world stage for a manufacturer the size of Aston, that's a huge achievement. So yeah, I like this DB11. I like it a whole lot more than I expected. No rose tinted glasses needed here. This is a great car and a great one for the future of Aston Martin. Anyway, if you enjoy this video, keep watching. More videos coming along very soon.